If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 0 of If This Goes On, Don't Panic. In this episode, Rachel, Dianne, and I discuss what the podcast is about, why we are doing it, and the format. So hi everybody, this is the first time we're recording a podcast together. How are you all feeling right now?
Doing well.
I'm excited. I think this is going to be awesome. I've been looking forward to this.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about ourselves before we talk about the podcast itself. I will go first. So my name is Alan Bailey. I'm an educator, and by that I have done all kinds of educational things, including teaching high school and corporations and all the places. And I was in a podcast called Alan and Jeremy versus Science Fiction, which is what actually led me to this podcast. That podcast gave up the ghost, I guess you could say. It ran its course, and we decided to do something new. And I'm also a former musician. I don't know if you could ever say former musician. I still play music, but not often much anymore. And I don't know. And a science fiction fan. Rachel or Dianne?
Okay, so I'm Dianne Morrison. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer. I also do a couple of talk shows called The Panel and Spec Women Chat for the SIFWA YouTube channel, where I am the channel manager. And that too has led me into this. It's kind of how I met Alan, right? It's how I met Kat, right? And so I have a very diverse background of a lot of very nerdy things. I have been part of so many different nerdy subcultures that I can walk into a room and I know where my people are immediately. I went to a writing conference for the first time this summer and I was like, oh, there's my people. So I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff around that where I'm going to be talking to people in the different related subcultures, right? So it's not just going to be science fiction and fantasy conventions. It's going to be like, I know some people who do stuff through the tabletop gaming community, and I know people who are involved in pagan festivals and people who do medieval reenactment and a bunch of stuff like that. So, and it all overlaps. It's all a big Venn diagram with a huge spirograph in the middle. So that's what I'm going to be talking about along with the fiction itself. And I'm really excited about this, Alan, and thank you for asking me to be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Rachel?
Hi, thanks for having me. A bit about myself. I came from a film background, graduating from LA Film School. I got involved in writing and sound editing, which brings me here to this podcast. And I currently work at a bookstore, and I'm a team leader and organizer for the Gametographers. I'm sure I'll be explaining what gametography is at some point throughout this podcast.
No, that's cool. That's really cool. That's interesting. Video game photography. I want to hear more about that sometime. That's really awesome.
Dianne, it's funny that you mentioned Kat when you were talking, because Kat Rambo is also a co-host of this show. And for those of you out there who don't know Kat, she is a science fiction and fantasy writer who has written, I don't know, hundreds of short stories. I know it's in the multiple hundreds somewhere. And she has several collections out. My favorite is Near plus Far. Great collection. And she's written a few novels, Beasts of Tibet and Hearts of Tibet. And she's coming out with, I don't know, like 4 in the next 2 years or something like that. So, and one of those series is with Tor. So everyone should keep an eye out for that. Unfortunately,
Yeah, very exciting.
yes, it's super exciting, right? I could not believe it. And I was lucky enough to read her short story in that world that's already out. And the second I read it, I was like, Kat, you should do more with this. And she's like, well, actually, I have a trilogy coming out with this. And I was like, well, that makes sense. That's why this whole world is so thought out. I was like, there's just so much detail.
It's cool. She's also a World Fantasy Award winner. I don't know what story she won that with, but I know that she has, and she's been nominated for a bunch of science fiction fantasy awards.
Yes.
She used to be the president of SIFWA, so
Yes.
she also knows a lot of really cool people. She's been doing this a long time. She even runs an online school to teach science fiction and fantasy writers things that they might want to know, where I also have a class, which I'm really excited about. But, you know, she's a great source of information who is going to be just ideal for, and she's nice. So I'm looking forward to working with her too.
Yeah, absolutely. All that stuff. And unfortunately, she couldn't be here because of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why we're having an episode 0 without Kat. But she will be in an episode 1 of the podcast. So speaking of the podcast itself, let's talk about what the podcast is about.
Cool.
You guys want me to start on that?
Go ahead.
Let's start with the concept of hope punk.
Okay.
See, because everything's around that, right?
Okay, yeah. So let's just give a very brief definition of that. We do talk about that a lot in episode 1. So the whole podcast is based around this idea of hope punk. And basically what hope punk is, in a very broad terms, is resistance to the what do I want to say, like social norms through hope.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe social norms isn't the right phrase I want to use.
Yeah, hope as a political choice, right?
Right. Yeah,
radical hope.
Yes, radical hope.
You know, the thing that I liked, I was like, okay, when you asked me to be part of the podcast, I'm like, okay, I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So I looked up what was hope punk, and it gave examples. Okay, Samwise Gamgee is hope punk.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, nice.
You know,
It's a good example.
right?
We actually talk about that exact thing in episode 1, people. Go ahead.
That's cool. And I'm like, this is my life. You know, my whole life is about hope punk, right? You know, so I'm like, yes, I'm totally on board with this.
Yeah. Actually, talking to you, Alan, that was the first time I'd ever really heard the phrase hope punk. It's a very interesting idea and concept to me. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So I too looked it up after you told me about it. And I feel like me too, that would be, you know, similar to Dianne. I relate to it very much. So
Yeah. I had not heard of it until I went to the 2018 Nebulas and they had a panel on it, and I immediately dismissed it, and I was like, it's just another, because science fiction has this thing where they name everything punk, so I just ignored it completely. And then I went to ReaderCon in 2019, and I met Alexandra Rollin there, who is the coiner of the term hope punk, and I talked to her a little bit. I got more interested in it. And then also there's a science fiction magazine called Dreamforge, who are based around similar premises, even though I don't think they actually knew about hope punk when they started either.
They're awesome. I really am hoping to get Scott Knoll on at some point. That would be very cool.
Yes, I would love to have him on, and I could definitely get you his information.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, I've talked to him too, so this is great. Small world. Yeah.
Yes. But you know, hearing it was to me a lifelong punker and political person. Some might say activist. I wouldn't call myself that, because I don't think I do enough. But I've done my fair share of protests and that sort of thing, and just the general political times. You know, it's like I feel like I needed to do more than what I'm actually doing, and also giving hope to people out there that, like, there can be a time after this, or there will be a time after this. Things will continue on, and there will be good things after this, you know? So I think what we're trying to do is take that idea, right, apply it to science fiction. I mean, it was a science fiction idea in the first place, but I think we're all, to some degree, science fiction and fantasy fans too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
So we want to keep that involved into the podcast. And then we managed to break this down into these different little subgroups. So, Dianne, you were already talking a little bit about yours. Do you want to be a little more like concise about what you're trying to aim for there?
Well, sure. I mean, like I have, I get involved in a lot of these different nerdy subcultures, right? And it crosses over with activism quite a lot, right? I see it happening in the community because these are like nerdy subcultures. They often try to build places that are more positive, right? Where they resist what's going on in the outer culture where they're often outsiders or they have different ideas, right? So I see a lot of that in these communities. And I would like to highlight a lot of that and show that there really are good things in the world and there are good people who are doing good things despite all the craziness that's going on around us, right? I also want to focus on the writers who are writing about this because it's a weird thing where it's not only a genre in science fiction and fantasy, but it is a movement, right? So I want to talk about that intersection. That's where I want to focus my efforts.
Cool. And that crosses over a little bit with what I want to do because my main focus has always been the writers and the publishers and the editors. Don't get me wrong. I love the publishers and the editors.
Absolutely.
And talk to them about how they're bringing all this stuff forward. And then we have Rachel kind of doing a different sub-theme. Rachel, why don't you talk about yours for a second?
Well, I guess it kind of goes with why I even did this in the beginning when you had asked me. The thing about, I'm into gaming, obviously, video gaming. And so being that, that's my main focus and what I do all day long with video game photography and stuff, there's this really weird stigma around playing video games. A lot of people can sometimes tend to think it's a waste of time. Sometimes people think that it is creating violence, shootings. It's kind of like one of those things that contributes to that. And I really disagree. There's a lot of positive things coming out of the gaming community, a lot of new technology, a lot of ways that we're addressing or that developers are addressing concerns in society. The gaming, the characters are becoming more diverse. And there's just a lot of really amazing things happening in the community. And, that's what I want to focus on talking about and highlighting. So that's where I'm coming from.
I think that's awesome because I don't have a lot of contact with that community, but I think that a lot of the really great stuff that's going on in science fiction and fantasy as a genre right now is coming out of video games. And SIFWA is now open to game writers as well as independent and traditionally published writers. So they're making an effort to be more inclusive of that community. I agree with you. There seems to be a stigma. There's a stigma against independent writers too. I think this is all nonsense. I can't wait to address that. And I'm really glad that you're taking that approach. I'm very excited to see what's going to come out of what you're doing.
Yeah, and maybe I'll find time to play video games again too. You'll inspire me, Rachel.
No doubt.
We'll see. Peer pressure.
There's a lot riding on you, Rachel. You got to do it. And I think you mentioned something else that was really good and that I wanted to bring up too, and that's diversity. I think that's an important thing, not only to Hope Bonk, but to what I would like to do on this podcast. There's a lot of great diverse writers out there, and editors and publishers. One I recently met, Bill Campbell. He's doing great stuff.
Right on.
And Zigzag Claiborne.
Cool. Doing
awesome stuff. Like all these people that are just don't get the attention that they deserve. And one of our first interviews is going to be with a guy named Tobias Buckell, who is also a diverse writer and definitely deserves more attention than he gets. An excellent writer too. So everybody should go and look him up.
Right on.
Will do.
So, okay. So I had a question for you all. So this whole podcast kind of came out of this idea. Like when my old podcast broke up, I just did a brainstorm and wrote down a whole bunch of ideas. And then I emailed them to some mentor friends I have, one of them being Kat. and was like, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? And Kat came back and really liked the Hope Punk idea and said, hey, if you're going to do this, I will help you with this podcast. So that's kind of how this got kicked off. And then we ended up needing help with the co-hosting. So I asked the two of you, why you wanted to come on and do this podcast. And I know you're both very busy and doing tons of different projects like I am. So I was just curious about that. Dianne, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Because I've been thinking about this. I knew you were going to ask me this, and I've thought about my answer. And here's the actual story. Okay. Recently, Canada had another federal election, right? And I saw a whole bunch of shit going on that really bothered me. The Conservative Party borrowed a bunch of the nonsense that the Republican Party has been using in the United States, this flirting with elements of fascism and pulling their propaganda nonsense in their election. They didn't win, thank God, but it made me think, okay, this is far enough. I've had enough of this. I need to do something. And what I was originally thinking was that maybe what I should do is start up the Canadian version of the Young Turks network, which is a progressive network in the United States. Mostly they're internet based that deal with progressive issues in American politics, right? But I don't have the time for this. And I could, if I put aside everything else I was doing and did nothing else, I could do it. But I was like, okay, no, I don't really have time for this. What am I going to do? And then you came to me with this podcast idea. And I went, this is clearly the universe answering my question about what I can do. So I'm here.
Nice. I love that. Rachel, what about you? How did I sucker you into this?
Well, I as I had mentioned before, I kind of already said of part of why that, I wanted to do this, and it was, shedding, positive light on the gaming community. But I realized, kind of like you were saying earlier, Alan, and sort of what you touched on, Dianne, is, the political climate, the climate, the social climate, all the climates are kind of messed up right now.
Yep.
And, it's really discouraging to see so many things going on. And I feel that we all need to be doing better. And, if that's my own personal opinion, that means that I need to lead by example and do better and do things that promote a positive outlook. So,
awesome.
That's why I said, yeah, of course. So
that's awesome.
I think that's really,
I feel.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just, okay, I was going to say that I think that that's really important. I think that a lot of the problem that is going on right now is that everything looks so bleak that we've just run out of energy. We're like, I don't know, I can't do anything about it, so I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. But that's not true. There's lots of things we can be doing, and it doesn't all have to be angry. A lot of it can be, small acts of kindness, or, making a small activist effort in your community, or, just little things, right? So we can do that, and we can highlight that this actually is happening here on this podcast. And I think it gives me hope, and I hope it gives other people hope too.
And so I think that's a good summarization of what people listening to this podcast have to look forward to. Right?
I agree.
Cool.
So one last thing I want to address before we end this podcast. So we've said a lot of stuff here, and I just want to kind of tie it together so everybody knows what to expect. So the theme of the podcast is Hope Punk. We're going to have little mini sub-themes. So Rachel is going to be dealing with gaming more. Dianne's going to be dealing more with science fiction communities, if you will.
Right.
I'm going to be dealing more directly with writers, editors, and publishers. And Kat herself is going to be dealing more directly with Hope and Hope Punk. So the way that this is going to work is every month we're going to have a podcast. Well, every month there's going to be a podcast come out. And two of us will be on that podcast with an interviewee. So co-hosts are going to be pretty interchangeable based on the theme, right? And we're going to try to switch those themes up. So, for example, it would be like my theme one month, and then Rachel's theme the next month, and then Diane's theme the next month, and then hopefully we can get Kat in there. Kat will be probably a little bit less than us just due to her extremely busy schedule, and then we'll move forward in that way. I will say the first few podcasts are going to be a little bit outside of that, but after podcast 2, I think we should be able to fall into that rhythm.
Cool.
All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
I'm really
great.
looking forward to working with you guys. This is going to be so much fun.
Me too.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. And thanks to our listeners for coming in and making this a thing, you know. We couldn't do it without them, right?
Absolutely. Spread the word. We're here. You know, we really appreciate you guys.
Yep. And don't forget, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter. We will have a website up very soon. Right now, you can find it at itgodp.libsyn.com or itgodp.wordpress.com. And if you're wondering what itgo is, that is ITGODP.
Which, of course, stands for If This Goes On, Don't Panic.
That's right. Absolutely. And you'll be able to subscribe anywhere that you can find podcasts. And make sure you share us with with your friends, because that is the best way to expand a podcast.
Also, if you have ideas or suggestions, feel free to leave them on comments on our WordPress site or in our social media. We're more than happy to listen, right? And we'll try to meet your requests.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else, Rachel? Are we missing anything?
No, I didn't mean to laugh in between that. I was just thinking of something in my head of me being the way that I am. I'm always contradictory. And I decided not to say what I was going to say. And then I laughed at what I said in my head. So no, I don't have anything else, but we look forward to having you all.
As you can tell, we're going to have a lot of fun with this, which is cool. It's going to be relaxed. And, you know, we're here to have a good time, right? So
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you in episode 1. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey with production by Rachel Renee. The theme music is by Father Flamethrower, Sable Aradia, and additional music is by Christopher Slydrowski. Intro by Dave Robinson. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.